You know what's tough? The things we don't learn until it's already too late. See, when it comes to men, most women find out the truth not at the beginning, but somewhere in the middle, after the heartbreak, after the confusion, after the late night questions of, what did I do wrong? And the reality is, it's not about what you did wrong, it's about what you didn't know. So today, I want to share with you 13 harsh truths about men that women usually learn too late, and my hope is you don't have to learn them the hard way. When it comes to love, one of the greatest frustrations that women face is expecting men to express it the same way they do. And here's the harsh truth: most men don't. That doesn't mean they don't feel it, it doesn't mean they don't care, and it certainly doesn't mean they're incapable of it. It just means they speak a different language. Where a woman might pour love out in words, in affection, in emotional detail, a man will often express it through action, through doing, through providing. He fixes, he solves, he gives. And if you don't understand that difference, it's easy to misread his love as absence. Think about it. A woman might say, "I love you," 10 different ways in a single day, with a compliment, with a touch, with a message out of the blue. A man might spend that same day making sure the bills are paid, making sure the car is running, making sure the door is locked at night. And while those may not feel romantic in the traditional sense, for him, those are his ways of saying, "You matter to me, I'm taking care of you, I love you." The tragedy is that too many women don't realize this until later, until the relationship has already carried tension from feeling unappreciated or unseen. And here's where it gets more complicated. Men aren't always great at explaining that what they do is love. They don't say, "Hey, I went to work today and endured the stress of the world because I love you." They don't say, "I stayed up late fixing that problem because you mean everything to me." They just do it. And women, who often look for verbal reassurance, for tenderness, for those intimate signals, can miss it. Then resentment grows. He thinks, "Doesn't she see all I'm doing?" And she thinks, "Why doesn't he just say it or show me affection the way I need it?" Both are loving, but both feel unloved. This is one of the harsh truths that so many women learn too late, that a man's love doesn't always look like her love. And by the time that realization comes, sometimes the damage has already been done. She spent years feeling neglected, not because he wasn't loving her, but because he was loving her in a way she didn't recognize. And he spent years feeling unappreciated, not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't see what he thought was obvious. Now, this doesn't mean women have to accept crumbs of affection. It doesn't mean a man never has to step up and learn to speak love in ways his partner needs. But it does mean that understanding has to flow both directions. A relationship survives when two people learn not just to give love the way it feels natural to them, but to give love the way the other person receives it. A man may have to stretch into vulnerability, into words, into softer gestures. And a woman may have to stretch into recognizing the effort behind his actions, the love behind his responsibilities, the devotion behind the little things that keep her world stable. Love isn't one size fits all. It's not always flowers and poems and whispered promises. Sometimes it's the man who wakes up every morning, even when he doesn't want to, because he knows you depend on him. Sometimes it's the man who fixes the little things, who stands guard without being asked, who sacrifices quietly in ways no one applauds. That's love too. And when you recognize it early, you save yourself years of confusion, disappointment, and unnecessary heartache. The truth is, if you only look for love in the way you expect it, you'll miss the love that's already being given. One of the hardest lessons to learn is that a man's silence doesn't always mean things are fine. Too many women confuse quiet with peace, when in reality, that silence can be the loudest warning sign in the room. You see, men are often conditioned from a young age to hold their emotions in, to avoid confrontation, to shut down rather than open up. So when he goes quiet, it's easy to assume everything is steady. But more often than not, silence is covering something deeper: disconnection, frustration, or a wall being built brick by brick. In the beginning, you might even find that silence appealing. It feels calm, it feels steady, almost comforting compared to the ups and downs of constant arguing or tension. But silence has layers. Sometimes it means he's trying to process. Sometimes it means he's avoiding. And sometimes it means he's already checked out emotionally while still sitting across the table from you. By the time that realization hits, it can feel like you're living with a stranger, sharing the same space, but not the same connection. Here's what's tricky. When women want to talk, they're often seeking connection. When men go quiet, they're often seeking distance. And if that silence goes unaddressed, it doesn't just stay silence, it turns into emotional separation. He's not telling you what he feels, he's not letting you into his thoughts, and you're left filling in the blanks with your own fears. That's when doubt creeps in. That's when resentment grows. And sadly, too many women only discover this pattern when it's too late, when the relationship feels like two parallel lives that never intersect. Now, it's not that silence is always a problem. Sometimes quiet is necessary. Sometimes it's the space someone needs to think, to breathe, to process without rushing into words that could hurt. But silence becomes destructive when it turns into a permanent escape route. Instead of solving the problem, he avoids it. Instead of explaining what he feels, he hides it. And when that becomes the rhythm of the relationship, communication breaks down. You stop talking about the little things, and eventually, you lose the ability to talk about the big things. And here's the harsh truth. By the time many women realize his silence wasn't peace, it's because the distance has already become normal. They look back and think, I should have noticed when the conversations got shorter. I should have seen it when the laughter stopped. I should have questioned why we could sit in the same room and feel miles apart. But often, that awareness only comes after the relationship has worn thin, after trust has eroded, after love feels like it's on life support. That's why it's so important to recognize silence for what it truly is. Not every quiet moment is harmful, but consistent silence, unbroken silence, silence that replaces connection, that's a red flag, not a comfort. Because love needs words, it needs communication, vulnerability, honesty. And when a man refuses to give those things, it doesn't matter how steady he looks on the outside. On the inside, he's drifting away. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes it's the beginning of the end. One of the harshest truths about men is that ego often stands in the way of vulnerability. From the time boys are young, they're taught to be tough, to hold it together, to swallow their feelings and push forward. They're told that strength looks like silence, that tears are weakness, that asking for help is failure. By the time those boys grow into men, that conditioning has become armor. And while that armor might protect them in the world, it can build walls inside their relationships. When you love a man, you want to know what's in his heart. You want to hear what scares him, what he dreams of, what keeps him awake at night. But for many men, opening up feels like stepping into danger. Vulnerability doesn't feel natural, it feels like exposure, like giving away power. So instead of saying, I'm afraid of losing you, he'll argue over something small. Instead of admitting, I don't feel good enough, he'll bury himself in work. Instead of showing sadness, he'll show anger. And on the surface, it looks like pride, but underneath, it's fear. The heartbreaking part is that women often misinterpret that shield. They see distance and assume he doesn't care. They see stubbornness and assume he won't change. They see anger and assume it's coldness. But what's really happening is a battle he's fighting with himself. A battle between the man he was taught to be and the man he wants to be with you. He may want to open up, but his ego whispers, don't look weak. Don't let her see you struggle. Don't lose control. And that ego, if unchecked, wins far too often. Here's the cost of that. Relationships starve without vulnerability. You can't build trust without honesty. You can't build intimacy without openness. You can't build partnership if one person is always behind a mask. When a man hides behind ego, He may think he's protecting himself, but what he's really doing is pushing away the very person he needs most. Over time, that creates loneliness, not just for her, but for him too. He ends up isolated in his own relationship, loved but unknown. And women often realize this truth too late. They discover, sometimes years in, that they don't really know the man they're with, not because he doesn't have depth, but because his ego never allowed him to show it. They find themselves saying things like, "I wish you would just let me in. I wish you trusted me enough to tell me what you're feeling." But by then, the habit of holding it all in has become second nature to him, and the distance feels permanent. The real strength of a man isn't in how much he can hold back. It's in how much he can let go. It's in choosing to be honest even when it's uncomfortable. It's in saying, "I don't have it all figured out, but I want to figure it out with you." That's not weakness. That's courage. That's maturity. That's what makes love thrive instead of just survive. Ego may protect a man's pride, but vulnerability protects his relationship. Attention is one of the most underrated currencies in a relationship, and for men, it holds a weight that often gets overlooked until it's too late. Every man wants to feel noticed, to feel like he matters in the eyes of the woman he loves. It's not about constant praise or grand gestures, it's about the subtle ways that remind him he's seen. The harsh truth is, when a man doesn't feel that attention, when he feels invisible in his own relationship, he starts looking for it elsewhere. And that elsewhere doesn't always mean another person. It could be work, hobbies, distractions, or anything that fills the void of feeling unseen. In the early stages of a relationship, attention flows naturally. You notice every little detail about him, he notices every little detail about you, and it feels effortless to give that energy. But as time passes, life gets louder, responsibilities stack up, the routines take over, and what was once natural starts to fade. He still needs that attention, but it's no longer as obvious, and if it doesn't come, he begins to question his place in your world. That's when you'll hear him say things like, "You don't appreciate me," or you'll see him pull away, not because he doesn't love you anymore, but because he's starving for something he doesn't know how to ask for. Here's what makes it tricky: men don't always voice this need directly. For many, asking for attention feels like weakness. So instead they withdraw, they become irritable, or they bury themselves in something that makes them feel valued. Maybe it's their career, maybe it's their friends, maybe it's a new interest that suddenly consumes their focus. From the outside, it might look like he doesn't care, but the reality is he's chasing the sense of being important, because at home, he doesn't feel it anymore. And women often realize this pattern too late. They look back and see the missed opportunities, the times he did something small and went unnoticed, the times he tried to share something and got brushed off, the times he wanted to be acknowledged but settled for silence. By the time those dots connect, he's already created another outlet to fill the gap, and the relationship feels like it's running on autopilot. But here's the thing: attention isn't about catering to a man's ego, it's about connection. It's about saying with your actions, "I see you. You matter to me. You're not just here, you're valued here." That doesn't take extravagant effort. It's often the smallest things that make the biggest difference. A compliment out of nowhere. A thank you for something he thought went unnoticed. Eye contact that lingers long enough to remind him you're still present with him. These are simple gestures, but to a man, they carry the weight of love. The danger comes when a man doesn't get that at home. Because whether we like it or not, men are wired to seek significance. If they don't feel it in their relationship, they'll find it elsewhere. That's not an excuse, but it is a reality. And many women discover this truth only after the damage has been done, after the distance has grown too wide, after he's learned to live without the very connection he once longed for. When a man feels seen, he feels secure. When he feels invisible, he feels replaceable. And that truth is what makes attention the quiet lifeline of love. Commitment and emotional maturity are not the same thing, and that's a lesson too many women learn after they're already in deep. A man can commit with a ring, with a promise, with moving in together, with taking on the title of being your partner. He can make those gestures sincerely, fully believing in the moment that he's ready. But commitment on its own doesn't automatically mean he has the emotional tools to sustain it. And when that truth shows itself, it can be devastating. You see, emotional maturity is about more than just showing up physically. It's about accountability, patience, empathy, and the willingness to grow alongside someone. A man who lacks maturity may stand at the altar and say, "I do," but the reality of day-to-day love, working through disagreements, handling stress, taking responsibility when he's wrong, that's where the cracks start to show. He thinks commitment alone is proof of love, but what you feel is the weight of carrying a partnership with someone who hasn't learned how to truly be a partner. This is where so many women feel blindsided. They see commitment as the finish line, the point where love should feel safe, secure, and steady. But then reality hits. He avoids hard conversations. He shuts down when conflict arises. He makes impulsive decisions that affect both of you without thinking them through. He struggles to put your needs beside his own because he hasn't grown past seeing the world only through his perspective. And the saddest part is, you start to realize that the promise he made was genuine, but his capacity to live up to it is still underdeveloped. The truth is, emotional maturity requires work that many men haven't been taught to do. It means facing discomfort instead of running from it. It means admitting fault instead of protecting ego. It means building not just for himself, but for the relationship. And without that, commitment becomes a shell, something that looks solid on the outside, but crumbles when pressure hits. What makes this lesson so painful is that it's often learned in hindsight. You think back to all the red flags you overlooked because the commitment felt like enough. Maybe it was the way he avoided deep conversations, or the way he blamed others instead of owning his mistakes, or the way he dismissed your feelings instead of trying to understand them. At the time, you told yourself, it'll get better once he commits. He just needs time. Once we're official, things will change. But time doesn't create maturity. Pressure doesn't create maturity. Growth creates maturity. And not every man chooses to grow. That's why some relationships feel lopsided. You're putting in the effort to communicate, to compromise, to evolve, and he's still operating from a place of immaturity. It doesn't mean he doesn't love you. It doesn't mean he didn't mean his commitment. But love without maturity can't hold the weight of real partnership. It can spark passion, it can create memories, it can even build a life together for a while. But eventually, the cracks will show. Commitment is the promise. Emotional maturity is the practice. Without both, love struggles to last. One of the most painful truths is realizing that not every man who pursues you is ready to keep you. In the beginning, pursuit feels intoxicating. He calls, he texts, he plans, he goes out of his way to make you feel like the center of his world. And in those early stages, it's easy to believe that energy is a reflection of his readiness. But here's the reality. Chasing is easy. It's the consistency after the chase that reveals a man's true character. A lot of men are driven by the thrill of pursuit. It gives them purpose. It sparks adrenaline. It feeds their ego. Winning your attention, your affection, your yes. That becomes their mission. But once they have it, once the pursuit is over, some men don't know what to do next. They confuse desire with commitment. They confuse effort in the short term with the responsibility of long-term love. And that's when women often find themselves asking, where did the man I fell for go? Why doesn't he try the way he used to? The answer is painful but simple. He was prepared to win you, but not prepared to keep you. Keeping someone requires consistency. It requires showing up on the ordinary days, not just the exciting ones. It requires building something deeper than chemistry, something stronger than attraction, something more enduring than butterflies. It means being intentional long after the chase is over. And not every man is ready for that. Here's where many women get caught off guard. They mistake the intensity of pursuit for proof of love. They believe the passion in the beginning is evidence of lasting commitment. And by the time they realize that pursuit without consistency is empty, they're already emotionally invested. They've built their hopes on what he showed in the chase, not on what he's able to sustain when the reality of everyday life settles in. Consistency is the true measure of love. Anyone can be exciting for a few weeks. Anyone can say the right words when emotions are high. But showing up day after day, even when it's inconvenient, even when life is stressful, even when the butterflies fade, that's what separates a man who's ready from a man who's just passing through. And when women discover this too late, it often leaves them questioning themselves. They wonder if they did something wrong, if they weren't enough, if they lost what they once had. But the truth is, they didn't lose anything. He just never had the maturity to give it in the first place. And that's the lesson that hurts most. Not every man who wants you today is prepared to keep you tomorrow. Not every man who pursues you is equipped to build something lasting. And while it's tempting to hold onto the memory of how he started, what really matters is how he continues. Does his effort match his words? Does his consistency match his pursuit? Does his love show up when the excitement is gone? At the end of the day, the pursuit may get your attention, but it's the consistency that earns your trust.